Unfortunately, that's not a really catchy title for, a Zoom meeting. Of everything I've learned by doing it wrong. So, so we appreciate the opportunity today to just talk to you a little bit about Zoom meetings. So to give you a little more background, as Cindy said, my name's Amber Fishvote. I'm the Civic Lab. And we have the great fortune of, we're located in Columbus, and we work with our local community, but also the great fortune to work around the state and around the country with other communities. A lot of the work that we do is based on meeting with teams, meeting with communities, and meeting with organizations. And so like when you all, when March and April hit last year, we had to think about the work that we do and how might we be able to do it in a different way through a platform like Zoom going virtual. Some of the trainings that we do are very, in-depth multi-day trainings. And so we had to figure out how can you host a training for, 50 people that's in-depth for 2 days on a Zoom and not make it where everyone is just bleary-eyed and kind of falling asleep by the end, or some of the community sessions. So how can you bring 80 to 100 people together to really have a meaningful dialogue and build relationships in this virtual platform and in kind of this remote work world that we're all in. So one of the things, we actually yesterday just finished up a 2-day training that we did with a group out of Nashville, Tennessee around our stakeholder engagement process. Normally these kind of trainings would be 2 days, they would be in person, we would have small teams, we'd bring in big posters, Post-its, markers, things like that. And so we've really kind of adjusted on the fly over the last year of how can we offer that same quality, that same value to the groups. And like I said, several of you I know on the call were part of this. Last November, we offered a community conversation series called Equity Works. And I think that's where Cindy saw a lot of the work that we were doing, trying to be intentional in that design of a Zoom. But then also we brought anywhere from 80 to 120 community members together weekly to really talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion. And those are really important topics. People get really passionate about them. So how do you help kind of navigate and facilitate a conversation like that over Zoom? And so I just wanted to start off today really with this, thinking about Zoom bingo, right? We've all been on these calls. It'll probably happen multiple times today. Someone's video screen freezes, can everyone go on mute? Or, hey, you're on mute, don't forget. That's kind of the buzzword right now of that. Kids, dogs, coworkers, colleagues, spouses in the background and the noise, just things like that. So just a little bit of levity as we get started today, and that it's going to happen. We all accept it. I think in this virtual world, we all have a little bit of grace around it and kind of find the humor in it. So what we want to do really to get started is it's going to be a little bit interactive today because we're going to help you think about Zoom breakouts and things like that. So we want to show you how they work. So we're going to go right into a breakout session, probably about 5 to 10 minutes. There'll be 3 to 4 of you in a room. And we really just want this to be a chance for you to get to talk to someone, to build some relationships, and just talk about Zoom. So we're going to want you to introduce yourself to the group. What online platforms do you use most frequently? As Cindy said, right? There's Zoom, there's Teams, there's WebEx, there's Meets, there's Hangouts, there's so many platforms. So whether it be in your personal, in your work, or even in your community work, what platforms do you use? What's your biggest challenge with online meetings? And then what do you hope to learn about Zoom today? So with that, I would say we're grateful to have the background of Cammie and Cindy in the background doing a lot of the tech work as well. A lot of times that's my role, so it's a little different this time. But Cammie is going to zoom you out into your breakout rooms. We'll spend about 10 minutes and then we will come back and then we'll get started in some tips and tricks about Zoom. So with that, we'll turn it over to Cammie. Hey, Kim, just checking to see if you wanted in the Zoom breakout room. Did you see the notification pop up, or you're welcome to stay at the main level as well? Thinking about Zoom, some of the things that work well, some of the challenges, and really just to introduce yourself and get to know people, right, in this virtual platform. So getting to know others that are part of the chamber and part of the community. So what I want to do today is walk you through some Zoom tips. So we're going to talk about some of the basics around setup and settings, thinking about what we refer to as our Zoom team. For those of you who will be doing, whether in your work or community, thinking about how do you set up and how do you facilitate constructive breakouts. And then thinking about when you're designing a Zoom meeting, the intentionality behind the design, the agenda, kind of the purpose of it. And so with that, really just want to get started in thinking about your Zoom settings. And if you haven't done this, I would encourage you to go through. You can do this through the app, but I really like going to the zoom.us and logging into your actual Zoom account and go to, on the left-hand side, you'll see a button for settings. And in basically one scroll on the web page, this lists out all of the options with Zoom. And I would encourage you to take some time and familiarize yourself with this, just because this talks about who can host the meeting. You know, when participants come in, are their videos automatically on? Are they automatically muted? If you want to do breakouts, this is where you turn on your breakouts or turn them off. Other tools like polls and the whiteboard. And do you want a waiting room? We talked about, you know, it hasn't happened probably as much, but early on people were talking about, you know, meetings getting Zoom bombed. So do you want a waiting room where people have to come through and be admitted to the room? Are you allowing people to use dial-in as well, or is it just computer? So I really just encourage you, you know, spend some time and familiarize yourself with this. This is how we ended up getting into a lot of the features that we now use, was really just going through this list and kind of looking at it, deciding what we wanted. Once you set these, then they're set for all your meetings going forward. You can look through the app, but the app has a lot of tabs, where this, you can again just see them all in one place. And then thinking about your settings, when you think about, you know, lighting, when you think about your background, your special effects. A friend showed me this early on, so here's one little tip for you. For all of those Instagram filter, you know, maybe your background, on the video aspect, you can actually touch up your appearance. And it seems minor, and it's not going to give you, you know, the Instagram filter of the kitty cat ears or anything like that. But it's just one of those things. Sometimes people want that comfort. They want to put that on there. You can do that. Sometimes it helps kind of round the edges on your background as well. And when thinking about your background, we all are working from home. So we've had some meetings where people are like, I don't want to turn my camera on because you can see, you know, my background, or, oh, I'm in my basement now. We're all working from home and we all understand that. So I think it's okay to see those backgrounds. Sometimes people want to use the virtual backgrounds. And so you can see as you go down the side, there is an option for virtual backgrounds, where essentially if you go on Google and you search Zoom virtual backgrounds, it will give you a million different options. If you want to be on the beach, if you want to be in front of the Golden Gate Bridge, if you want to be in the mountains, if you just want your office to look clean, there's even just fake office pictures. You can pick to your heart's desire what you want. The only thing, Cammie and I were talking about, you know, thinking about your virtual background and the meeting that you're in. So, you know, if you're in an interview meeting, it's probably not the greatest idea to have space kittens floating behind you. But if you're on, and maybe it is depending on the company, or if you're in a team meeting, you just want to lighten the mood. Sometimes I've done that before. It's just casually change my background to see if people notice. So there is some fun with that. So just thinking about, you know, the context of the meeting and what your background might be. And one quick note on lighting as well. And so I will say I had some people ask me early on if I use any kind of special lighting, because sometimes, you know, if you use overhead lights, it's too bright. If you use lamps, it may be too dim, things like that. Until this week, honestly, I just used the lamps in my house and it was fine. I will say in the winter in Indiana, when we don't see the sun for a week or so, I finally broke down and invested in a light. It's a ring light. You can get them anywhere from $10 to $20 at Walmart, Target, Best Buy. And it's just nice because it gives consistent lighting to your office. And so instead of having to use overhead lights or having to use just lamps and it being a little dark, you can use it. You can go, if you want, you can invest in, I mean, there's all kinds of lighting. There's special microphones, there's headphones. Typically those, they're nice if you want them, but they're not something I don't think you necessarily have to have if you're managing or facilitating a meeting. But you can get just small, cheap, you know, tricks like that. Any of you that have kids, they may have those selfie ring lights. You can use those and just pop them on your computer, and those work well as well.
Hey, Amber, there's a question in the chat about the virtual backgrounds and the blur when somebody moves. Is there a fix for that?
Unfortunately, there is not a fix for that. So that's just something that happens with virtual backgrounds. You also see it a lot of times with people when they put their hands up, like their hands look kind of wonky, if you will, because it's that virtual background. The one thing I would encourage you to when thinking about those virtual backgrounds, because you can't really fix that blur that I've seen, think about what you're wearing and what your background is. So if your background's blue and I have a blue shirt on, sometimes like my whole body is just, my head's basically going to be floating in the Zoom, right? Because it's like that green screen almost. So we've been on calls where you'll see someone and they casually move and all of a sudden their whole body goes away and all you can see is a head. So it's just and I will say, if you go into your app, you can actually see your video ahead of time. So if you go into that feature, you can try the smooth out the appearance. You can try a virtual background if you want to try some out before going into a meeting with that. So thanks, Cami, for hopefully that helped. We haven't seen anyway, and it's just one of those that people are used to it by now. So as we come on to meetings, I always think it's important, everyone's trying to figure out, are they on mute? Are they not on mute? Are videos on, not on? So what we always try to do is really start, if we're doing a meeting, with one or two basic kind of screenshots of just a few of the few Zoom tips and some of the things to think about. So really on this one, you'll see when you go in, it talks to people just quickly. And sometimes we go over these. Sometimes this is just something that we have up for that first slide when people kind of log into the meeting. So talking about, where can they find the mute button? How do they turn on their video? If they want to see participants, if they want to see the chat. Also, what kind of speaker view? So do they want the speaker front and center? Do they want a gallery view? And then we just go through a few other Zoom tips, as you kind of can see as we go down through here. I will say, if you are hosting a meeting, are participating in a meeting that's larger than your team or your company, sometimes it's helpful to, on your profile, you'll see if you kind of scroll to the top of your picture, 3 dots pop up. We always encourage people to go in, click on that, and rename themselves. So for instance, I may go in and rename Amber Fishfolk, Civic Lab. So if you're on a community meeting, you can see the company people are with, and again, making those connections. It's also helpful too, in case you're logging in through a spouse's account or through a phone number. We had someone come on the other day, and it was a gentleman, and he was our keynote speaker, but he was logging in through his wife's account. So we didn't realize he was on the account until finally he changed his name so we could see it was him. So just little things like that, it can really help. And then again, if I'm on a chamber meeting and I'm really wanting to make a connection with someone from the hospital or someone from Cummins, or if I have a question for chamber staff, it's just nice to see that name and then see what company people are with. And this is just another example of a slide we use sometimes for our intros, kind of putting in there a fun picture, talking about, we realize, right, the distractions in the background, kids, dogs, colleagues, coworkers, spouses, things like that, and that's okay. One of the things, and if any of you facilitated a meeting, you've probably had this experience of when you are running a meeting and you're trying to do everything on the back end. So you're trying to let people in, you're trying to do the breakouts, you're trying to record the session. And so we learned this from some good colleagues of ours on who's on your Zoom team. And if you're doing a small team meeting or maybe a small company meeting, you probably don't need all of the roles because you can handle it. But if you're doing larger community meetings, if you're doing larger company meetings, it's just great to think about, okay, with the meeting you're having, what are the roles and who might be able to take on those roles? So some of the ones that you see on the screen, who's admitting people, who is monitoring the chat, like so having Cami kind of see that chat. Sometimes if you're presenting and you're full screen, you can't see the chat function if you don't have it on. So having someone just make sure that those questions are being answered if anyone has those technical issues. Thinking about recording the session. So if you're wanting this to be played later or people to be able to view it later, who's recording? Are they, starting when they need to, stopping when they need to? Breakout rooms can be a beast of their own. So who's working on, setting up the breakout rooms? And we'll go into breakout rooms in just a minute. And then a helpful thing too is a text message feed. And so when we're on usually a training session, we actually have a text message feed going on with the people who are the back end kind of technical support and the presenters. Because what you'll find is, especially in a good meeting, if the chat just starts going and people start talking a lot, it's sometimes easy to lose a comment in there. So I may be saying, hey, Cammie, so-and-so can't get in the meeting, but you may lose that in the chat. So having your phone nearby and having that text message feed, it just helps if there's any back-end technical issues that go on. And then I will say, most importantly, who's facilitating the meeting? So if you're the one in charge of the meeting, are you facilitating and running all the background? Is someone else facilitating it and, in partnership, and you're running kind of the back-end details? But when you get on Zoom sometimes and it's that awkward, all the videos pop up and everyone's silent and no one's sure who's supposed to run the meeting. So we try to be very intentional in the design, thinking about, who's facilitating and helping run that meeting and helping keep it kind of on track. You probably noticed as you came in as well, thinking about intro slides and thinking about how do you kind of have music or background. Again, sometimes we come into meetings, and especially we've all done this, right? Maybe you're a few minutes early, you're the first one there. It's you and whoever's hosting the meeting. There's that awkward silence, and then there's just your screens. You're looking at each other on the screen. And so sometimes what we like to do is just to kind of get energy up and try to avoid that silence is have some kind of intro screen. So have a welcome. Maybe it's just a presentation that you're doing. Maybe it's that Zoom slide that we showed earlier. And then being able to play music in the background. That's a tip that we learned from one of our partners, and it's the easiest thing you can do. So any of you, if you have Spotify, if you have Pandora, Apple Music, things like that, when you go in at the bottom of your screen and you click share screen, you're going to see any of your windows open. So if there's a slide that you want to present or things like that. Down here in the bottom, you'll see the share computer sound. And so what you do, you don't want to just share music, because if you share music, it will go out your speakers and in through your microphone. So it can create kind of an echo. But if you click on that share computer sound, and then you can share your screen, you can pick whatever you want, right? So these are just a few Spotify playlists that we pick from. And so you can go into any kind of music app you have. It's a great too if you're trying to do maybe a video. So if you're working with a leadership group and you're doing a TED Talk, or you've got a video you want to show, just remember in that bottom corner, that share computer sound. And that's going to make the quality of the sound much better than if you try to play it out through speakers and back in. So I want to spend a little bit of time, because I think this is where we have spent, Civic Lab as a team, on a lot of our meetings. We've spent a lot of time of thinking about breakout rooms. How do you start them? How do you open them? And then how do you intentionally structure them to really provide some great content? Because breakout rooms can be great if they're structured well, but sometimes they can also really quickly go haywire if there's not some kind of intentional questions or design behind them. So for those of you who haven't used breakout rooms before, I'm just going to go through really quickly how to set them up. And you'll have these slides, and there's also a tutorial down here that I took the screenshots from. I will say, when it comes to settings in Zoom, if there's anything like this, if you Google it, there are a plethora of videos out there that will help you through each one of these. So if you want to breakout rooms, music, you can find it as well through Google. But when you go into your settings, you're going to want to make sure they're turned on, first of all. You can't have breakout rooms if they're not turned on in the settings. And there's a few other kind of settings in there to decide on how you want to structure your breakout rooms. Then once you do that, it's really fairly simple. So when you're in Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, usually where you see like your chat, your participants, there's going to be a breakout function. And you'll only be able to see this when you're the host. So on a meeting like today, you won't be able to see it. But when you have that, you click on that breakout room at the bottom, and it pops up a dialog box. And there's essentially just a couple buttons you need to click. So you'll need to decide how many participants you want per room. And so you can set, I believe you can set anywhere upwards of 50 breakout rooms. So if you're on a very large meeting and you want, 2 people in a room, do you want 6? we usually encourage, if you're doing kind of small conversations, at least to put 3 or 4, because sometimes in a group, there's someone who may not be talking or may not have their camera on, or distraction may come up and they can't participate. So at least putting 3 to 4 people. So if someone's on there that can't participate. And then basically, do you want to set them up automatically or manually? A lot of times, like Cami did when you all just came in earlier, you basically say put 4 people in a room, set it up automatically, and go. For the group that we were working with over the past 2 days in Nashville, Tennessee, they had 6 work teams in the community who were working on everything from early education to adult attainment to homelessness and housing stability. And so they had these very intentional teams. So we went in and set them up manually. So once you go in and you do that, essentially it's going to give you every room if you do it automatically and tell you who's in the room. If you're doing it manually, you'll say that many breakout rooms and it will come up with the room. And then you can click here and you can assign anyone you want to those rooms. So, and then after that, you click open all rooms and it will open them up like it did for you earlier. Typically the participants get that pop-up screen saying join the room and they go from there. I will say the broadcast feature is a great feature. So as you're in a breakout room, you'll have that broadcast message to all at the bottom. So like Cami gave you I think a 2-minute warning. If there's questions you want to send out, reminders, links, you can do that. And then when you're ready to kind of close the room and bring everyone back to the main Zoom, you just click close rooms. And then it gives a 60-second countdown. So when you close it, know that there's going to be that time lapse. Which is kind of fun and kind of interesting. I always joke that we need that Jeopardy music playing as the 6 seconds counts down, because you see it coming. And we had someone yesterday and she goes, it never fails to amuse me. You're right mid-sentence and you see the clock, clock ticking down to like 3, 2, 1, and someone always gets stuck mid-sentence as they're trying to come back into the session. So when I think about breakouts, these are just a few things to think about. If you want to do breakout rooms with a group, whether it be in your team, whether it be community or, in a larger organization, is what's the purpose of the breakout rooms? Because again, the breakout rooms can offer a great opportunity to build relationships and you can have some really deeper discussions. I think we found that out with our equity sessions, but you want to be intentional in how you're designing them. And what are your guiding questions? So we're firm believers in whenever you're doing any kind of breakout, things like that, having very good questions that you want to pose to the group, putting them out front before the group goes into breakouts and then broadcasting them, and just being intentional in that design. And then using the broadcast feature too. So that's just great to kind of keep people on track, because sometimes groups get really excited about the first question and forget the others. So we always just say, if you haven't, don't forget there's these other questions. And then I would say, depending on your content, do you need room facilitators? So for some things, like earlier, right, there were a few basic questions. You can all chat, kind of get to know each other. Sometimes if you're doing longer group sessions, or if the questions are more in depth. So for instance, in our equity series, we did the impacts of the racial wealth gap. And so we put people in rooms for about an hour to talk about it. And so for us, it was very important to have room facilitators in there who could ask the questions and walk them through that virtual simulation. So again, just a few roles and thoughts to think about with breakouts. Collaboration tools for Zoom. There are so many out there. There are so many that you can subscribe to. There's software, but there's also a lot of great free ones that you can use. And so these are just some of the common ones that we see used. Within Zoom, they offer you the option to use your own polls. So you can actually go in, you can create questions, you can open it up to the group you're working with, they can answer. They have whiteboards, so you can kind of scribble notes. And then there's something called Jamboard. Jamboard's a Google product. If you haven't seen it, it's a lot of fun because it actually has Post-it notes. So for all of you who want to do meetings with Post-its and notes and stickies and can't do it since we're virtual, this gives you a little bit of that. But you can go in and it's a space where you can kind of co-create together in real time. I will say also too, don't overthink it. The 2 best tools that we have found when we're facilitating some of these virtual meetings is Google Docs and Google Sheets. So if you're in a meeting and it's a team meeting and you're wanting to take notes, or you're working with a community and you're wanting to kind of gather information, setting up a Google Doc, putting the link in the chat, and then everyone can click on it and kind of, put their iterations of notes in there is great, especially if you're doing breakout rooms too. It's easy to put, breakout room 1, 2, 3, and just let them put their notes in there and the group can come back together.
Hey, Amber.
Yes.
We got a couple questions.
Yeah.
How do you place a screenshot in Zoom? So like with your instructions you had there, how did you get that screenshot of that?
So what I tend to do is so I'm using Keynote right now. So Keynote's essentially the Mac version of PowerPoint. And so what I would do is take a screenshot of the picture I want to use. And so on a Mac, for instance, it's Command-Shift-4. Command-Shift, so if I'm on a web page and I want to use like that screenshot of the breakout, I do Command-Shift-4. I drag my toolbar or drag my mouse across it, and it will take an actual picture of the screen.
Okay.
And then I just put the picture into the PowerPoint. So it would be like putting in any kind of clip art or image or anything like that. I found that that's typically the easiest way to do it, is just take that screenshot, put it into your presentation, and you can upload it, when you're sharing your screen for your presentation.
Okay, thanks. The other question is there a way to view the questions in the breakout room?
So if you have questions, and we didn't do it on this one, but what we tend to do is, and this is an interesting thing, I'll just quickly go on about the chat. So when you have the chat up, and if you're putting links or questions in there, the person can only view them once they enter. So if I put in a Dropbox link of all the materials for today's meeting, but I'm the first one in and then you all join, you can't see that. So just to keep in mind, wait until everyone's in the room, or just remember to repost it a few times, the link or things like that. What we tend to do is with those guiding questions for breakout rooms, we will post them in the chat before we send people to breakout rooms. So when you're in the breakout room, you can still see the chat feature. So you'll be able to see them in the chat. We also tend to broadcast them out so that way they're kind of, the broadcast is kind of like a tweet. It's about 140 characters. So we only broadcast out one question at a time. And sometimes with groups, if we're doing a really in-depth discussion, we send them a link ahead of time and say, don't forget the guiding questions are on the agenda. Here's the link to the agenda, make sure to click on it so you'll have those available before you go into the breakout.
Thank you.
Yeah, any others?
Related to that is a question, when you're sharing your screen, it appears very small to others. How do you enlarge it for them?
So what it depends on, and that's sometimes part of it's your personal settings, and then part is the person who's viewing it. So for instance, there's different ways that you can play your screen. So if you're playing it in presentation mode, you can do that. And it's large on my screen, but what you need to do sometimes at the beginning is tell people that it's back to those view options. So if I'm watching Cindy and she's sharing her screen, I need to click on full screen, or at the top in the corner, there's a gallery view, and you can pick how you want to view. So do I want to view the presentation? Do I want to view the person who is speaking? Do I want to view do I want to see everyone's faces in the presentation? So I would encourage you just to kind of play around with that feature, and that can sometimes make the presentation larger or smaller. But unfortunately, if you're doing a presentation in kind of full screen mode, you don't have a lot of control over what size it is for them. So I just encourage you, as you're going through that intro slide, just remind them of, here's how you can get it full screen. Here's how you can see, the chat and everything like that. Thanks, Cindy. Any other questions? Okay. So going on to just thinking about what's the purpose of the meeting. And here's where I think maybe that I like to think that we could offer kind of the most advice or thoughts on, because this is something that we have really worked on with meetings. And I will say one of the things, and we were maybe notorious for this even before virtual meetings, is having a very detailed, very laid out, annotated agenda of every meeting. And the work that we do, for instance, the agenda we had for our 2-day session was 9 pages. Now, that's not to say that's just the agenda, but that's all the guiding questions, that's the content, that's the principles, that's everything. So you don't need to have a 9-page agenda for a Zoom meeting unless you're having a in-depth meeting, but just having that annotated agenda, at least for you and your team as you are hosting a meeting. And so these are just a few examples of some of the things. I mean, we go into, especially we did a large summit for the state a few weeks ago. We go into very detailed, what time is the team coming on? If you'll see in that top left-hand corner, what time are we going to open the room? Who's in charge of the welcome slide? Who's in charge of admitting people? Who's going to do the recording? Who's doing the intro? Who are they passing off to? Who's doing the presentation? Right? Who's going to share the slides? Who's going to talk? Even to breakout prompts. So if you're doing that breakout and you want to post the questions, we're going to prompt, this one at 2:10, this one at 2:15. And it may seem like overkill, but especially kind of in this virtual world and with larger groups, it just kind of creates that consistency for the back end team so that everyone knows kind of who's doing what role, when they're doing it, why they're doing it, and just we try to make it as seamless as possible for instance, for you all as participants. So how do we help facilitate that meeting so that the back end, it's kind of like the duck on water, right? Everything all seems calm for you all, but we're all in the back end, or Cindy and Cammie are on the back end and their legs are just churning and churning with all this kind of back end work. And then I think about, what do you learn from each meeting? And so we always try to take, when we see best practices from other Zooms, and kind of be intentional as we put that into our design. A lot of the meetings that we facilitate, it's about the content, but really it's deeper beyond that. It's about building relationships. And so as we go into these meetings, we're really working across community collaborations, or we're talking about equity, and we're trying to build relationships with these groups so they can work together better. And so thinking about that, what do we learn from each meeting? How can we improve? And sharing those with others. These were just 2 fun examples I saw that I thought you might enjoy. So the top ones, if you're doing a team meeting or even a group meeting, and if you need some kind of voting option, sometimes it's hard to have people vote in the chat because it's that stream just starts to go really quick. And so you can't see, okay, we're all on board with this idea. So this was a team meeting where when they have discussions, they have 2 basically virtual backgrounds. And so they have green and they have red. And as you go through, and if you're voting on an idea, or where are people kind of with an initiative, you put your screen green or red. And so that helps easily identify, kind of in a different way, right, what you can do for discussion. The other one in the bottom is very similar, thinking about voting. So if you want to identify either what team you're on, or if you're voting on some kind of initiative, project, things like that, having that, again, those virtual backgrounds with numbers or shapes or things like that, just makes it a little more fun than just putting in the chat, yes, we're on board, no, we're not, things like that, or oh, I would rather we move on with this project first. So just, again, a few kind of different ways that you can make it enhance your team meetings a little bit. I will say again in that discussion too, being intentional in the series of agreements. So when we did the equity series, it was really important for us that we kind of put these series of agreements for discussion out front, because we're talking about a lot of topics. Some of them can get a lot of reactions out of people, and we want to share our experiences. We want to be open. And for us, it was really important to create a safe space where people could be vulnerable, share their stories, and share their ideas. And so at the end of each meeting, and you don't necessarily, a team meeting or things like that, you may not need to do this, but for us, for these large community meetings, it was really getting this series of agreements and saying, as we come together in this virtual platform, let's just remember, we're here to speak about our own experiences. We're here to kind of be vulnerable. We want to share, we want to build relationships. So I would encourage you to think about, if you're doing larger meetings, are there a series of agreements for discussion that you might have? Are there things about what you want to talk about, how you want to talk about? Are there principles? Sometimes if your company or organization or your collaborative has principles, sometimes just putting those up at front and saying, don't forget, as we're here, we're thinking about, we're equity focused, we're collaborative, we're community minded, things like that. What are those principles, values that you can kind of put out there at the beginning? And then we're getting close to the end, so we'll have a time for questions here in a minute, but thinking about distractions. I know sometimes we're all very, you put your virtual backgrounds on, you're trying to be very professional, right? But we all have distractions. I mean, that is the world that we're living in right now. Kids are at home, people need to let pets out, people need to let pets in, dogs are barking. There's always the humor, right, of the big fat fluffy cat tail that will walk by at some points during a meeting, and that's okay. I think that we all have come to understand that, and actually sometimes it provides a little bit of humor to the meeting, sometimes when we need it most. I will say this is one of my favorite things I've seen recently. So this was actually a reporter, and I don't know if she was on CNN, NBC, something, but she came on and was doing a presentation, and then she posted on Twitter, "Just so I'm being honest." So the left was what you see on TV if you were watching her. The right's what's really going on, right? She's in her shorts, she's using a chair as a desk, her kids' toys are everywhere. And this went online and went viral, and it had over 300,000 likes. So if you're sitting there worried and stressed about your background or what's going on in the background, you're not alone, right? I mean, we're all dealing with this the best we can. And it was funny because this actually led to this movement, of probably about 50,000 posts of people just saying, "Same here," right? And then who hasn't done some form of this, right? With your pajama, I mean, probably half of you, this 8 o'clock meeting, you've got your pajama pants on, but you've got your sweater on top. And then I really appreciated this one too, of like, what have been the unique ways that we've used, right? Puzzles, board games, what desk have we used in the last year? I saw a great picture too, and it was someone who was trying to do an interview from a hotel room, and they used an ironing board. So it's just there to say, we all, I think in this virtual platform, we all have a little bit of acceptance that this is the way it is. We all offer that grace. Things go wrong sometimes on Zooms. We had an instance in one of our presentations recently where the screen froze for participants, but not the presenter. And so you just stop, you reset. It's not a big deal. You let the group, I think that's part of the acceptance, just be open, say, "Hey, we're having a technical difficulty. Give us a second," and then you move on. And then one thing I will say, when you think about cameras and should they be on or off, I think, at the beginning, we were all very much, you need to have your camera on, and we need to, see faces. And it's great to see faces, because since we can't interact in person, it's great to be able to at least see, you who have your camera screens on, and we can interact and talk. But do they have to be on? And again, part of learning and being vulnerable, we were in a session where we say, we highly encourage you to turn them on and participate in the breakouts. Afterwards, we had someone contact us and say, "I appreciate that, but I have a social anxiety disability. And for me, in a group setting in person was very hard, but going to the Zoom platform has been even harder," right? Because now I can't fully gauge people's reactions because we're not in person. And so I think being aware of those things, that's not something that we had ever thought about. We just thought, "Oh, if we can see your face, then we can all talk, and we can all have these conversations." So I think that just being aware, everyone's situation's different, and everyone's comfort level with Zoom is different, or whatever online platform. So how do we encourage participation, but also be inclusive and be welcoming? We want everyone to be part of the conversation. So sometimes if someone doesn't have their camera on, there's a reason behind it, and that's completely fine. If someone can't participate in a breakout, that's completely fine. We say, "Hey, we hope you can, but if you can't, completely understand." So just being aware of those as you go out and you host Zoom meetings. And then last but not least, this is one of my favorite, and we've had this conversation a lot recently about, people being like, "You didn't join the Zoom," or "Let's have a Zoom." And does it need to be a Zoom? When we were all meeting in person, it was fine to send emails or maybe have conference calls, or, just call someone one-on-one. And I think sometimes we've gotten so into, it's just great to see people's faces, right? So we can quickly send a link and we can log on and we can chat. But sometimes it's just as easy to pick up the phone and have that conversation. So I feel like, don't feel like there's this pressure that if you're going to meet with someone, it has to be a Zoom. Because, before March of last year, we could meet with someone via email. We could do it over the phone, so it's great for Zoom, and Zoom has a time and place, but sometimes don't feel like you have to use it. Sometimes a 10-minute phone call can be even more effective or efficient than, an hour Zoom. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I think we've got about 5-10 minutes left. So just wanted to see if there are any questions, and then we can all kind of see each other's faces again as well.
Amber, a couple questions came across in the chat. One is about the use of closed captioning.
Mm-hmm.
Is that in the settings? Can you give us some insights?
Yes, so if you're trying to do closed captioning, again, that's one of the settings, and we haven't used that as much, but that's one of the settings that you can find in your Zoom settings. So I would encourage you to go to that zoom.us, and there'll be an option down through there for accessibility.
Awesome. And then there's a question about, do you have insights for spotlighting videos when you're the host?
So spotlighting videos. So are you talking about trying to get like one person where they're pinned, so they're the key? I see some people shaking their heads.
Courtney Rushton shaking her head.
So if you are a host, that's something that you can do. And so when you're a host and you are, I'm trying to see if I can get you to the exact right. So I believe when you go, if you're a host and you see your participants, you can actually go on there and there's a little drop down and you can pin someone and then they're the main video. And so that way, if you want your speaker to be front and center while other people are asking questions, it will still keep them front and center.
I'm going to do that right now. Any other questions? Those are the two that came across in the chat.
And feel free to unmute yourself. That's what we always tell people at the end. There's also the fun little emoji of raising your hand. So we always encourage people to raise their hand if they have a question as well.
Amber, we didn't talk about polls. How have you used those?
So we haven't used those a lot because we tend to use Google Docs and things like that. Or sometimes we tend to actually do a form. We use a platform called Wufoo. It's WUFOO. And that's essentially where we use for registrations, surveys, things like that. It's really easy to use a poll, I will say. You can go in, again, once you have it turned on in your settings, at the bottom of your screen, you probably see where you have like participants, chat, share screen. Once you have the poll setting turned on, you'll have a poll down there. And you can actually, you turn that on as the host, type in your questions, and then when you're ready to broadcast it to the group, you can, and I can't see it since I'm not the host today, or we try one, you turn it on and it will pop up in your screen and say, did you like today's meeting? What did you like best? Pick ABC, what's your favorite color, right? And you can leave that open. You can leave it open an entire meeting if you want. When you close the poll, it will then pop up the results to the team. And so the team, sometimes it's another way, right, that you can do some quick voting or take quick action items and things like that. I like this a lot better so I can see people's faces. When you're always sitting there, talking to your presentation screen, it's a little different.
Amber, I have a question.
Yeah.
When you went to the screen where you showed us to click the little box that said share computer audio, there was another box next to that that had something to do with video. What is that box?
That is, so you can click that, and I opened it up. That's if you're doing video. Sometimes you can use that if you want to optimize it.
Okay, so even if you have a video like embedded in your PowerPoint, clicking that will optimize that video?
I tend to say click those if they're embedded in, because, right, if you have a video in your PowerPoint, the audio, if you don't have the audio or that optimize turned on, the audio is going to come out your speakers of your laptop or desktop and then go back in your microphone. And you can do that, but sometimes it just creates this feedback where there's a little bit of a feedback loop or a buzzing. So yeah, optimizing video or that sound will really help the quality of that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
There's a question. There's a question from Marla. Good night. It says, going back to the fun way of voting, how do you add the numbers or symbols to your picture? And Marla, you may have to,
So one of the things I would do if you want to do that kind, look at, I think you can look and see if there are any Zoom backgrounds that have that already. Like I said, people have done that. So Google Zoom backgrounds, you know, with images. If there are particular ones you want to use, so if you want to do, and I'm going to call Bill Jensen out here, if we want to do IU versus Purdue, because I see his background is Purdue, right? If you wanted to do a vote on that, you could make those backgrounds yourself, and they're really easy. You can Google how to do that, and they'll show you, you know, you need an image that's this size, right? And then you could go into Photoshop or anything like that. And then you could put, if you want to put a little IU Purdue, you know, maybe throw Notre Dame in there as well if you're doing some voting, or numbers. The other one with the colors of the red and green, again, you can search those and save them. And then you would just send those out to the group ahead of time, or put a link in the chat where people could have access to those. And then if you want, while you're in the meeting and you wanted to change those, that's where you would go into your settings and click your virtual background. So you can change your background, you know, as you're talking to the group.
It is 9 o'clock, so I want to be respectful of people's time. Boy, this is just a reminder that the success of any endeavor requires solid communication. So I know we have small businesses, education, bigger organizations represented on the call, but the common denominator is we all need to improve the effectiveness of our communication. So thank you, Amber, for helping us understand how to do that better and how to use this tool in a better way. And I think you gave us some really actionable things we can use right away. I also want to thank Daniel with Omega Management Group for their support. Just great information. Thank you all for being with us today. Have a wonderful Friday and a wonderful weekend. Bye-bye.
Thank you.